00973.
It's 8 minutes before 8, and we continue to get significant reactions to the sad anniversary of 12 months since the start of the conflict in Ukraine. Let's bring to the conversation British Defence Secretary Ben Wallace, who joins me now. It's good to have you on, Secretary of State. Good to speak with you again. Almost 12 months ago to the day, you told me that your lad, who was then 12, was concerned, was worried about the situation in Ukraine and Putin's invasion, and as a son does with his father, seeks reassurance. What are you telling your boy now about the situation?
Well, I think the thing I say is, the international community hasn't disappointed. It's come together rapidly. We have a very strong coalition of support, not just the NATO members, but way beyond that, way beyond these shores of Europe. And as we saw by the gifting of tanks, I think it's now up to nearly 200 Western tanks only a few weeks ago. Their resolve is stronger than ever. And our safety, Nick, in this country is delivered by our alliances. Britain on its own, yes, has a great armed forces, but on its own, against an adversary like the size of Russia, you need those alliances. NATO is, for example, an alliance of 30 that keeps us safe, big or small, and we shouldn't worry about that. Therefore, about the threat directly to us at the moment, but we should also recognise that President Putin has got more dangerous.
So he sees his dad slogging his guts out for the last 12 months, but you can tell him, don't worry, son, we are going to get there. The good guys are going to win this.
Yeah, I think so. And I think if you look on the ground at the moment, Russia, with its alleged invincible army, has been massively damaged. Its Russian army, he's lost probably over, we think, close to 190,000 dead or wounded of his soldiers. He's lost huge numbers of his armoured vehicles, over 6,000 of them damaged or destroyed or captured by the Ukrainian. He hasn't taken a single one of his objectives from day one. This time last year, the Russian plan was to be in Kyiv in a matter of hours, to take the country in 3 weeks, and really be on top of the situation in the first 3 days. Well, it's 365 days now, 188,000 dead or wounded troops later, massive amounts of his armour, nearly 2/3 of his tanks destroyed or damaged, and an isolated country. And I think that is, could have been avoidable. And everyone, friend and foe, tried to persuade President Putin not to do this.
What have you learned, excuse me, sir, what have you learned about Western unity in the last 12 months, Secretary of State?
I think it's stronger than we might have thought it would have been. At the beginning of this, if you think about the sort of stereotypes about young people, the stereotypes about political parties, actually what's happened is in the United Kingdom, we should be incredibly proud that people have come together. I stand in the House of Commons, and the SNP, the Liberal Democrats, the Labour Party and the Conservative Party are all united on this. That you go to demonstrations. I spoke at one yesterday in Trafalgar Square, and you look at the crowds and it's full of young people. They care about the values as much as our grandparents. And I think, we all probably indulge in the usual stereotypical that, my children are more interested in TikTok and Instagram than they are about everything else. But the reality is they care. And I think we should be proud in this country that we stood strong and still are standing strong. And we found in Ukraine a fellow country that chose those values. And for its choice, Russia has sought to destroy it.
You talk about unity. Can I take you to the United Nations General Assembly? They approved a non-binding resolution last night calling for Russia to end hostilities in Ukraine. But of the 193 members, 39 either abstained, 32 in total, or voted against, 7 in total. Your reaction to what I would suggest is quite a high number of countries who don't seem to be on board?
Well, if you're Russia, you want support. So you've got 7 countries in the world. The abstaining is, and for example, China has abstained consistently on this. It's not exactly a full-throated support for Russia, is it? And I think Russia would have hoped that a country like China would have actually supported them. But it is, what it does show is a worrying direction in the last few years of, a move towards autocracy around the world, and a number of countries abandoning the causes of human rights and embracing what we see President Putin espouses.
But couldn't that be Russia's game plan, Mr. Wallace, that the so-called developing world chooses probably to abstain because of connections it sees with the old Russian Empire? Isn't that one of the worries here?
Well, I think one of the worries here is that the West has not been good enough in the last 20 years. It's selling its values and telling people why it's important. And, if you go to some countries in the world, like in parts of Africa, Russia has been busy telling them recently that the cost of grain is not because of their invasion of Ukraine, which is the actual reason, but it's because of the West's behaviour in Ukraine. And they've started to win in some areas, or try and win that propaganda war. And as we've all seen, glued to our television screens and our Twitter feeds, we've all seen that this war has been much about information as it has been about the bullets and the bombs on the battlefield. And I think modern warfare is going to include information warfare. And again, we are different than many. We believe in the truth. We don't believe in making up news. We don't believe in making up facts. But ultimately, we have to lean in as an international community to amplify events that happen. And actually, if you remember, Nick, at the beginning of this, Russia kept trying false flag operations before. It kept trying to concoct all sorts of coups and excuses and all sorts of things to give it a reason to come and invade Ukraine. And because the international community changed behaviour, we shared intelligence publicly in a way we hadn't done before, they couldn't get that traction. They couldn't successfully paint a picture they wanted to. So we have been successful at it, but I think we have to keep working at it across the world.
Last couple of questions. You're passionate about your job. I saw that earlier this week when you provided the facility for me to come down and see the training. This means a lot to you, and you're a pretty plain-speaking bloke. When you consider over the last 12 months, Ukrainians have paid a blood price. They've had children abducted. They've had women, in some instances grandmothers in their 80s, raped by Russian soldiers. Secretary of State, what shocked you most in the last 12 months?
I think the conduct of the Russian armed forces that has, we started all of this all saying this is about the Kremlin, it's not about the Russian people, it's not about the Russian army. But that, the examples you've used has shown that systematically, right through their army, it's been accepted that is acts of war, that it is okay to rape and murder and kill people and break the Geneva Conventions. And I think that is shocking that an army that purports to be a world-leading sort of major economies army feels that resorting to sort of an activity that's almost medieval in the sort of rape and pillage and destruction is somehow acceptable. And I think that should worry us all, because the only two cards that Putin has left to play, because it isn't military competence and it isn't public support and it isn't economic support and it isn't an injustice that he thinks he's correcting, because that's not true either. He's got two cards left, which is that he'll win through brutality and he'll win because the international community will get bored. And we mustn't let those two things happen, because if they do, the rest of the world is watching, and there are all sorts of other people in the world who would think that's the way they get what they want.
Last couple of things. You mentioned earlier, Secretary of State, TikTok. You may be aware the European Commission have banned staff from using TikTok on work phones. Do you TikTok on your work phone, Mr. Wallace?
No, I don't have TikTok. We should all be careful, whatever social media we use. They all collect data about us. And I think there's a phrase about, the internet, which is, if it's free, it's probably because you're the product. And, that is how these companies work. So I think, TikTok is overall owned by a Chinese company. And I think if you put your data on there, then you're not just sharing it with the person you're publishing it. But also, it is a medium that all your young viewers use, right? Your young listeners. That's just the reality of it. And so just the caution is, be careful what you put on these things.
Final question. Noting there have been a number of arrests, you both served in Northern Ireland in the military and you were a minister for Northern Ireland. You'll be aware earlier this week a senior off-duty police officer was shot in County Armagh. He's still in a critical, but I say stable condition. Again, there have been arrests. But can I ask you for a word on that with someone with close knowledge of the area?
Yeah, look, it's tragic, and especially in that area. If you remember the attacks that happened even after the horrendous attack that happened after the Good Friday Agreement, I think the sadness is that there are still people in that society who think that violence is the way to solve their problems. Luckily, they're not successful, and luckily most of the community, and it was very refreshing when I was a junior minister to go back to communities that in some areas I used to patrol as a soldier. They have moved on and they desperately want to move on. The differences that used to divide people in Northern Ireland are no longer there in many cases. And so, the United Kingdom, the Irish government and that community, and remember, this police officer was teaching young people to play football. Those communities, I know, and I know from my own experience, they don't want to go backwards, and they will condemn in the strongest term those perpetrators.
Grateful for your time as ever. Thank you, Ben Wallace, Defence Secretary, appearing here on LBC at 2 minutes after 8. Let's get the latest news headlines.
On your radio, on Global Player, and
Play LBC.
leading Britain's conversation. This is LBC.
From Global's newsroom at 8 o'clock, President Zelensky has promised to push for victory this year on the first anniversary of the full-scale